We'd like to thank you for joining us for another episode of Looking to Jesus. My name is John Hines, preacher for the Church of Christ in North Ridgeville, Ohio. My co-host is
Daniel Sanders, preacher for the Quail Valley Church of Christ in Batesville, Arkansas.
Daniel. What's up?
Hot, hot, and
How hot is it down
apparently,
there today? I want the temp.
well, we're getting into the heat advisory, and if I was looking right, according to the weather, you are actually supposed to be hotter than us today by about a degree or two.
Yeah, that's right. You ain't got nothing on us.
Yeah, for the one day. Then you go back to like 60.
Mid 80s tomorrow. Es muy caliente.
Oh, in Fuego.
Okay, that's your weather update for the week.
All right, next week.
All right, so last week, we finished up our study of Romans.
Yes.
And we're going to do a few topical studies, at least for the time being. I'll say this, if anyone has any requests for any topics they would like for us to speak about, feel free to let us know one way or the other. You can send us a message on Facebook or whatever it is. And we would be glad to talk about things. What we're going to be talking about today is discouragement. And I think a lot of folks, in thinking about issues like anxiety, depression, discouragement, it all somewhat probably goes hand in hand. So I thought we might talk about those issues today. And Daniel, let's just start with this. Do you want to talk about discouragement as a preacher?
We can.
You want to talk about that at all? You want to give all of our listeners an insight into our psyche?
Well, there's different things that happen, whether it's personal attacks from time to time. Uh, I've dealt with it. I've been preaching for 20 years and dealt with different types of moments of discouragement. Whether it's just somebody just disagreeing with you, or maybe sometimes you preach a lesson, it hits home, and sometimes personal attacks happen that way. You see people that you grew up with, or people that you've had an influence on, or some sort of influence in helping them obey the gospel, and you see them fall away. There's the discouragement of just personal comments, actions that are done. Uh, that's just naming just a couple of the different things that happen, or things that don't happen, even when you're sitting there and how certain matters may be handled. You face a lot of different animosity, different anxiety, where your family is affected by this discouragement as well from time to time. And you're not supposed to, try not to bring it home or bring it into different things, but it does happen. And we face difficulty as preachers, sometimes wondering, do you see it today? Speaking, you're a little bit older than me, but people in our age group and a
Hey,
little
why
bit
are we going
younger.
there?
I'm just pointing out the obvious, but I didn't mention how much
That
older.
is a discouragement in and of itself. How
You're
dare
you were
you?
born in a different decade than I anyway. Anyway, but what do we see today is that people our age and younger of going in and preaching, and they don't last very long. They get so discouraged where they just don't want to preach anymore. And we've seen where that has been a struggle of people trying to find places to people trying to find preachers, but also being able to withstand different things. We face different moments of discouragement on at different times in our lives preacher. I mean, we still face them even today after being around for a period of time.
Yeah.
Uh,
As you mentioned that, I'll save that story. Uh, where's the verse? He who would sing songs to a heavy heart. Where is that verse?
Sing psalms to a heavy heart.
Yeah. Ah. And of course, now I'm not going to be able to find it. Yeah, it's Proverbs chapter 25, verse 20. Like one who takes away a garment in cold weather, and like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a heavy heart. Proverbs 25, verse 20. The ESV, let's see, that doesn't help too much. New American Standard. New American Standard says, like one who takes off a garment on a cold day, or like vinegar on soda, is one who sings songs to a troubled heart. And the point that it's making is there are times where we are very short on comfort. There are times where our heart is heavy. It's not wrong to have a heavy heart.
Yeah.
You know, when the Lord said, "My peace I give you," it's not like the world gives it. And
Right.
that in the world we have trouble.
Yeah.
And I was talking to one of my kids this week, and oh, I've been kind of down recently. And sometimes I probably should not talk when I'm down, but I did. And I said, I'm not sure we really should be happy." And it was a funny thing to say. And it was my daughter, and she kind of looked at me like I was nuts. Um, but I'm going to make a case for it, or at least somewhat of a case for it, because we're not in heaven.
Yeah.
We're not in heaven yet. And where I want to start today's study, I'd like to start in Psalm 126. And what we're going to be talking about today, we'll eventually, after this initial passage or two, we're going to talk about Elijah. And I think Elijah is one of the main examples of someone who was so discouraged. He was extremely discouraged. We're going to talk about Elijah and we're going to talk about Job. And both men, one of the things they say that is common between both of them, Elijah says, "Take my life," and Job deplores the day of his birth. And so it's something similar. But before we get to Elijah and Job, this is Psalm 126, and it's talking about the return after the captivity. And in verse 5, it says, "Those who sow in tears shall reap in joy. He who continually goes forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing, shall doubtless come again with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him." You know, we have the hymn, "Bringing in the sheaves," bringing in
Yeah.
happy song, kind of omits that part about those who continually go forth weeping, bearing seed for sowing. And that, as I was thinking about that in parallel with the parable of the sower. The parable of the sower is in Matthew chapter 23, or pardon me, Matthew 13. In Matthew chapter 13 is Matthew's account. And we won't read the whole thing. We should be familiar with it. Daniel, I'll get your take on this. And by the way, someone made mention again how I ask questions, and I say I'm going to ask a question, and then it just turns into a statement. I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
I'm sorry that you feel that way.
And
No,
it wasn't me that made the comment, just clearing
no,
the
no, it was someone else. In Matthew chapter 13, in the parable of the sower, the Lord's talking to the disciples, and he says, "A sower goes out to sow. Some falls on the wayside, some falls on the stony ground, some falls among thorns, and some falls, of course, on good soil." And there's a lot of different points to be made. But I wonder if one of the things, in light of that passage in Psalms 126, those who sow in tears, as we sow, the very fact that a vast majority of our time, the seed either does not come up, or it comes up but only for a short time, or the cares of the world choke the seed and it becomes unfruitful. The vast majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, those are going to be the results. I think what the Lord is doing with the disciples is he's wanting to prepare them for the reality. Because, you know, imagine telling a farmer, okay, you go sow your field. Now, 99% of the time, it's either not going to come up or it's not going to come up and be fruitful. How depressing would that be for the farmer?
very.
That's extremely discouraging.
Yeah.
And I think what the Lord is doing is he's preparing the disciples for reality. It's like you're going to have to sow in tears. It's going to be very discouraging because, and just as a preacher, but it's not exclusive to preaching. And it's like, man, you preach the truth and you think, why aren't people responding to it? Why aren't people
Right.
repenting? Why aren't people becoming Christians? And it's very discouraging. And I think it almost, that the Lord is saying, expect it to be discouraging. It should be, it should be in the sense that the Lord doesn't want them saved, but this is the reality. So you need to expect it.
Yeah.
If you think you're going to have success 100% of the time, you're going to quit after day one. That's what's going to happen.
Absolutely. We look at some of the different things, and that kind of nails it as well as that as preachers, you sit there and we develop what we would call that fire sermon, and then we don't
And
see
it's
anybody
like
respond.
how could they not come forward at
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
And they
and
don't.
that happens, and we face a lot of feeling down, feeling some of those different things because not seeing the response that we would anticipate or the actions that we would anticipate from brethren or others that are outside the body of Christ and people
Right.
that are hearing this like, why didn't you obey or why didn't you follow? Why didn't you listen?
Right.
Uh,
And
and that
as a preacher, I get, and I'm not saying this is how it should be. I'm just telling you this is how it is. That you start going down a road where you feel like you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And
And
I will say,
you get into that part of when they're out fishing, casting their nets all night,
yeah,
and Jesus tells Peter, go cast it one more time. We've been toiling all night.
and caught nothing.
Yeah. But we'll do it because you asked us, Lord.
Right. You just made me lose my thought, Daniel. I had a
I'm
thought that I
sorry,
wanted to
but I
say.
had that thought first, and I wanted to get mine out first because you were making a statement, asked me a question, and said you were making a statement again.
Horrible, horrible. Um, it's easy to feel like you're wasting your time.
Yeah.
And the Lord is wanting the disciples to be prepared for that. And
Yeah.
in my notes, I included the word remnant. And remnant is somewhat of a discouraging word.
Means small amount.
It's a small amount. I remember down in Louisiana, I asked a question one time. I think I've mentioned this before in class. I asked the question concerning Noah and the ark when there's only a few, that is, 8 souls that were saved. And I asked the question, was Noah a failure? And a fella said, yeah, I think so. And I'm like, Noah was not a failure. Noah was victorious. Those with him were victorious. The failures were the ones outside the ark. But, we pray for the kingdom to grow. And it's not wrong to pray for that. And we work for the kingdom to grow. But the reality is, it's always a remnant.
Yeah.
That's just the reality. And that can be very discouraging. And as a preacher, like I said, I there are times where I feel like I'm absolutely wasting my time. I remembered what I was going to say. I will say this, Daniel. Do you think, and me and you have both been in this situation, where you get to a point, and it may be dealing with individuals or dealing with an individual or individuals, where you get to a point, and the Lord said it. If they do not receive the message, shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them. There are times where we have to leave, where we make the choice to leave because we do feel like we're wasting our time. And we don't want to waste our time. We want to be redeeming the time. That's Ephesians. And so that point where we say, I'm going someplace else, that is that is in response to extreme discouragement. But that's the reality.
It
Like
is.
when people don't want to hear it, when they don't want to hear the gospel as we're preaching the gospel and they just tune it out, it's like, well, that's to put it blunt, that's when both of us are family men. That's when we start making plans to move and go someplace else. And that's discouraging. But that's reality.
Yeah.
Those If we are going to come rejoicing, we have to go sowing in tears. And it is disheartening, to say the least. So now we turn to Elijah. Because what did Elijah feel like he was doing?
He felt alone. He felt he was
Yeah.
left. Felt
And
like
he,
it wasn't, nobody was listening, nobody was obeying, nobody was with him.
you want to give us a rundown of like kind of the lead up to, we're going to be in First Kings chapter 19. You want to give a little bit of a lead up to that or?
We can, I can a little bit. So we kind of prior to that in chapter 18, Elijah is facing the gauntlet, facing a challenge from the prophets of Baal. And he mentions it on one occasion here where he says, let me get the right verse. Oh, where is it? Oh, verse 22 of chapter 18. The Elijah said to the people, I alone am left, a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets are 450 men. He felt like he was in the minority, you could say by looking at the numbers, but he felt like he was the only one left. And we see he makes this challenge to the prophets of Baal about, whose God is truly a God that will answer the call of the people. The people, the prophets of Baal, they had set up this the different offering, and Baal never came. They had cut themselves up with and cut their arms and everything, and nothing would happen. And yet, as we look, Elijah, he sets up his altar, he sets up his offering, and does all the different things, and God consumes that. But yet, as we still see, he's facing an obstacle with Jezebel. And you get into chapter 19, first few verses. Ahab told Jezebel all that Elijah had done, also how he had executed all the prophets with a sword. Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, so let the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as a life of one of them by tomorrow about this time.
Well, that
And
kind of
then he's
stinks.
yeah, so he's already feeling alone, and now he's got Jezebel breathing down towards him, wanting him to be able to be executed himself, just like how the other prophets had been executed. And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life, verse 3, and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. And he is in a point of isolation once again.
Okay, so let's talk about our characters.
Yep.
Who is Ahab? I asked the question. You're not
Oh,
answering it. You're supposed to answer it.
Ahab is one that works with Jezebel.
Ahab's king of Israel.
Yeah.
Okay? Jezebel's the queen. Jezebel is a murderous wench. That is who Jezebel is. Now we know so Elijah is a man of God. Is it James chapter 5 where it says Elijah was a man with a nature like ours?
I believe that is correct.
And and by the way, it also references the praying for rain and such things as that. Anyway, so you have Ahab as a king. Ahab's the king of Israel. And Jezebel, he's married to Jezebel. Notice Jezebel. That's that last part there. It's the prophets of Baal. They're idolatrous, murderous, and this is what's happening in Israel. You have prophets of Baal. You have this pagan worship going on. And so for one thing I would ask, it's like, okay, Elijah, you just killed and all the people seized the prophets of Baal and killed them. What reaction did you think Jezebel was going to have? Do you think she's just going to say, "Thank you, sir, give me another"? I mean, no,
Yeah,
she's a
yeah.
murderous wench. So she says what she says. I'm going to kill you by this time tomorrow. And Elijah runs for the hills. Um, I'd like to read a little bit. So, leaving off or picking up where you left off, verse 4. He himself, this is 1 Kings chapter 19, verse 4. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree, and he prayed that he might die and said, it is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my fathers. Then, as he lay and slept under a broom tree, suddenly an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. Then he looked, and there by his head was a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came back the second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you. So he arose and ate and drank, and he went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. And there he went into a cave and spent the night in that place. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? So he said, I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts. For the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. Daniel, could you read from verse 11 down through verse 18 for us?
Yeah. It says here in verse 11, then he said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord." Behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore into the mountains, broke the rocks in pieces before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still small voice. Excuse me. So it was when Elijah heard it that he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood in the entrance of the cave. And suddenly a voice came to him and said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he said, "I have been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts, because the children of Israel have forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they seek to take my life." Then the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus, and when you arrive, anoint Hazael as king over Syria. Also, you shall anoint Jehu, the son of Nimshi, as king over Israel, and Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abdel Meholah, you shall anoint as prophet in your place. It shall be whoever escapes the sword of Hazael, Jehu will kill, and whoever escapes the sword of Jehu, Elisha will kill. Yet I have reserved 7,000 in Israel. All knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him."
Okay. So in thinking about this issue, and Elijah is extremely discouraged.
Yes.
I mean, when he says, "Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." Do you sometimes, and I'll get your take on this, Daniel. You know, when you think about issues that you faced in life, do you sometimes make a mountain out of a molehill, or do you sometimes, what's the word I'm looking for? You focus on the negative rather than the positive.
Yeah, both. It's easy to be pessimistic
Yeah.
when things are going when things are not going your way. It's
And
easy to be able to fill that void with pessimism, and that creates more that creates more anxiety. That creates
yeah.
more discouragement, builds up more discouragement. And sometimes it may be something that it may be the smallest thing that may be going on, but we are making, as you said, that mountain out of the molehill where we make it a lot worse and see it as a lot worse than what it may truly be because of the negative connotations and negative impact of other characteristics.
And it may be very, very bad, but sometimes by focusing on the cloud, we don't even see a silver lining.
Right.
And we don't even see the good. And what I'm thinking of here, Elijah is, and again, a man with a nature like ours. Obadiah, Obadiah had, right, and Obadiah was a good man back in chapter 18.
Yeah.
Obadiah had taken those prophets, what is it, 150 of the prophets, that's chapter 18, verse 4, and had hidden them 50 to a cave, and had been feeding them and giving them water in this time of famine. And so Obadiah runs into Elijah down down through
7.
verse 7 and on. And Obadiah tells him, let's see, Obadiah actually tells him about those who he's hidden. Let's see, where is that verse? Verse 13. This is Obadiah speaking to Elijah. Was it not reported to my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord, how I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets, 50 to a cave, and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, go tell your master Elijah is here. So here Elijah is, and Elijah says, I'm all alone. And Obadiah has told him there's 150 prophets who I've hidden from Jezebel's massacre. I've hidden them. I've taken care of them. And Elijah, just frankly, like we're talking about, he can't see those he can't see those 150. He can't see them
100.
even though
100.
Obadiah's told him about them.
100. It's 100. He put 50 in a cave.
Oh, you're right. Pardon me. 100.
It, regardless, there's a small remnant of people.
There's a small remnant of people. But here Elijah is, and when he runs for the hills, he says, I'm all alone. And it's like, no, you're not alone. He doesn't even know about the 7,000,
Yeah.
but he should know about the 100. But sometimes when things are bad, we can't see the good news. We can't see the remnant. We just focus on what we've lost.
Yeah.
And we just need to slow down and make sure we're paying attention for one thing. And Philippians chapter 4, meditate on those things that are good and lovely
Yep.
and focus on those things that are good and lovely. It's easy to focus on, it's like all those prophets that were killed. And it's like that's horrible. That was horrible that they were killed. But there's at least 100 left. And you need to remember that. That's one thing I thought we might mention. Daniel, let's make application back in chapter 19 now. He goes a day's journey into the wilderness, and he came and he sits down under that broom tree. He says what he says, and then he lay down and he slept, and an angel touched him. And what does the angel touch him to do? What is
Arise and
the
eat.
Yeah, arise and eat. So what's the application, Daniel? What do you sometimes need to do? Verse 7 again, the angel of the Lord came back a second time, touched him, and said,
Yeah.
arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you.
We feel when we're discouraged, we have that pit in the stomach and we don't want to eat. We don't want to do different things. And it kind of knocks us down even into a deeper depression of things where our physical body is not
Yeah.
getting sense to be able to sustain things. And so kind of bringing the misery on more. And so you just got to sit down. You gotta nourish yourself. You got to take care of your body.
There is a
And we
time to
would.
fast, but there's also a time, and the angel literally says, or the angel says, arise and eat, and he lays down again and he touched him, arise and eat, because it sounds funny, but I remember there was a Facebook meme based on this account, and it's like, sometimes you really do just need to take a nap and get a bite to eat.
Yeah.
It's like when things are really bad, sometimes you need to just rest and eat a little bit.
And what's the common courtesy a lot of times when someone is sick or someone is down
Yeah,
that someone else might do? They're going to bring them something to eat to try to help them kind
right.
of resustain themselves in building some sort of physical strength back up and trying to build some physical strength on the actual body to help them in sometimes it's helped them recover, but they also to help have to endure.
Yeah.
And that's what Elijah's going through. He needed something to continue to endure on this because he needed his physical body. He's going to be taking a toll on things, but he still had some things that he needed to do, and he needed physical nourishment.
I remember one of the accounts when the disciples returned to Jesus, he pulls them aside because there had not even been time to eat anything. And it's like you need to eat a little bit.
And
And
that's the instruction. I'll speak for my wife because when she sees me starting to get run down with some different things, or I'm also facing some difficulty, she tells me to take a snack to make sure that I'm taking care of myself by eating and making sure that I'm taking care of my own physical body. That way, I'm also preparing myself for some of the different things to help recuperate, to help recover, to help continue on in whatever it may be that I'm going through.
and there may be time where you do need to just rest. You just need to rest.
Yeah,
And it's like stop running and just rest.
yeah,
Take a nap. You need a good night's sleep. When you are so discouraged and you're having trouble resting, and it starts, I mean, physically, it starts doing things to your brain chemistry, and you need to rest.
yeah,
And we'll talk more about that as we get along. So that's what the angel tells him to do. Arise and eat, the journey's too great for you. So he rose and ate and drank. He went in the strength of that day, 40 days, food 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. What Horeb is, that's Sinai. And so this is where Elijah's running. So I wanted to make the point. Here Elijah is, and he's running. He's running, and he's running a long way. But where he's running to is the mountain of God. That's where he's running to. A lot of people try to run away from God.
yeah,
When things are bad, they run as far and as fast as they can the wrong way. And it gets worse and worse and worse. And Elijah was running, but to his credit, he was running towards God.
yeah.
And I think there's a lesson there for us.
Absolutely.
Our,
Absolutely is. With all the difficulty in our life to, realize the bigger picture of everything and that God is in the center of it. That God is there. He is wanting us to come to him, to know him, to find him, and he cares for us. And he is offering help.
right.
As we look at this for us today, he is our support through Jesus Christ. And
Right.
over in First John too, I've been working on a First John series on Sunday night here, and we just got done looking at First John chapter 2 recently. That Christ is our advocate,
Yeah.
and we are to run to Christ because he's offering aid for us. Here in Elijah's case, he's been offered the physical food and aid on that, but also he's running to God and being able to know that God's going to be able to help him. He felt that difficulty. He's going to say it again how he felt that he was left, but God gives him the reassurance of everything here in just a little bit
Yeah.
of being able to continue on in the journey and knowing when you know that someone has, using terminology, but someone who's got your back, there's comfort, there is reassurance of being able to continue on when you have that support, and we have that, and we have that in God, and God's going to demonstrate it even further to Elijah.
Yep. There is an example of someone running away from God, and that's obviously Jonah.
Yeah,
And it's like you have two options. And Jonah was terrified. That's
yeah,
why Jonah ran. Sometimes we like to represent him as just defiant, and he was defiant. He was defiant because he was terrified. He was discouraged. He didn't want to go to Nineveh. And so he's running away. So you have these two men, one's running away from God, and the other one's running to God. And so you have that lesson for us. So he comes to Horeb. He goes into a cave. He spent the night in that place. And then the word of the Lord came to him and said, "What are you doing here?" And he again says what he says. "I alone am left." Verse 11. The Lord says, "Go out and stand on the mountain." And the Lord passed by, and a great wind broke into the mountain, but the Lord's not in the wind. The earthquake, the Lord's not in the earthquake. The fire, and the Lord's not in the fire. I personally think the application is stop listening to all the noise.
yeah,
And it's like here Elijah is, and he's listening to Jezebel's threats, because Jezebel is frankly blowing up. And it's like, don't fear her. You think about earthquakes and fires and this mighty wind, and it's like, oh, well, that's just terrifying. And the Lord's like, stop listening to that. That's not where I am. Now I'll tell you who you should fear. And then there's the still small voice. But it's like we have a tendency to listen to all the garbage.
yeah,
And it's like, stop listening to the garbage. The Lord is not in the garbage. And it's like we see the fires, starts becoming a metaphor. The fires and the earthquakes and the boisterous wind. And it's like Peter walking on the water. When does Peter start sinking? When he looks over and he's seeing the storm.
yeah,
And it's like, keep your eyes on Jesus. What are you listening to that garbage for?
right.
I think that's why after the resurrection, and you have the apostles who were arrested, and those who arrested him are like, you can't preach Jesus anymore. And what does Peter say? Should we listen to God or to you? And it's like, I'm not listening to you. I'm
Yeah.
not doing
Yeah.
it. And it's like, we have, feel free to offer your 2 cents on here. Do you think there's a lot of people even in the church who need to turn the news off?
Yeah.
Feel
Simply
free.
put, I'm one of those people. I watch the news. There was certain
How
points in
dare
my
you?
life in the last 10 years that it was on certain news channels 24/7 or whenever the TV was on. That's all I
Yeah.
was watching. And then my phone had the phone app open. I'm sitting there reading article after article after article. And finally it just came to a point of why? I asked myself the question, why? Why do I engulf myself in so much? Does that mean I can't listen to it? No, but I had consumed myself of looking at all the other stuff and kind of getting away from the little small voice, that voice of reason coming from God,
Yeah.
and being able to just focus on the other things. And I didn't get to the extreme level, but I've kind of following suit of what's our country coming to, what's our world coming to? It's going to come to an end. Well, I have to remind myself it's going to come to an end eventually.
Yeah.
God's in control. I need to reaffirm
Yeah.
my faith and trust in God. Yes, are there things that I can do to be proactive? Yes, there are things I can do to be able to help, but it needs to be also centered around God and not let the other things overwhelm that.
Do you remember when the Lord was talking about the destruction of Jerusalem? And he says there will always be wars and wars and rumors of wars. Or he says there will be wars and wars and rumors of wars. And he says,
Yeah,
let not your heart be troubled. And it's like, wait a minute. How can I do that? How can I not let my heart be troubled by wars and wars and rumors of wars?
yeah,
And it's because Jesus has overcome the world.
yeah.
And it's like there will always be wars.
Yeah, we were talking about some of it earlier before we got on about some of the different things, and people have just Christians have gotten themselves consumed with everything, especially with the recent turmoil that we're seeing in our world. But again, let's consider the bigger picture. What is our goal? What is our purpose? We're to serve God, keep His commandments. We're looking forward to heaven,
Yeah.
and not let these other things. Yes, they are going to happen. Yes, there are things that we can handle, but don't allow it to affect your faith.
Yeah. Again,
Run to God.
Ahab was king of the country. Ahab was a horrible man. He was the king.
Yeah,
Jezebel was the queen. And yet here Elijah is and the Lord saying, don't listen to the noise. Don't listen to it.
yeah,
You know, those Christians in the first century who were in the time of the Caesars and in Judea in the time of the Herods. It's like, let not your heart be troubled. Well, yeah, but did you hear about the Tower of Siloam that fell on those individuals? Isn't that horrible? Did you hear about those Galileans whose blood Pilate mingled? Yeah, Jesus heard about it. And
hear
he said,
about
"Do you think they were any
how
worse
those
sinners?" And
yeah.
it's like,
How
repent.
about those Romans? How about that Roman Caesar that was stirring up all that problem for the people, and you had people like Aquila and Priscilla leave Rome
Yeah,
to get away from some of that turmoil. You get Nero, you get the other ones that have continued to destroy
yeah,
Christians in the early centuries.
yep. You know, in our study of Revelation, oh, I think it was Polycarp who secular historians claim that when the soldiers came to bring him to his execution, and Polycarp was, according to history, a disciple of the Apostle John, that John had converted him. But anyway, the soldiers came to bring Polycarp to the execution, and Polycarp opened the door and invited them in for supper that day. And it's like, how could you do that knowing that you were going to your death?
Yeah,
And it's because I'm not, you know, you used the word a minute ago, consume. And we live in a consumer society and we consume a lot of stuff. And frankly, the things that we consume end up consuming us. And it's like we know who's ultimately wanting to consume us, and that's the devil.
yeah,
And it's like, turn it off. Don't listen to it, Elijah. I'm not in the fire. I'm not in the earthquake. I'm not in the wind. We have to be more disciplined about what and who we listen to.
right.
Doesn't mean that we're ignorant of the devil's devices. We don't want that. But it also doesn't mean that we have to take in everything that is said. And it's like, nope, take heed how you hear and take heed what you hear. So the Lord's not in those things. And then after the fire, there's a still small voice. And so when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and he went out. And suddenly a voice came to him and said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah repeats, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts because the children of Israel, they've forsaken your covenant, torn down your altars, and killed your prophets with a sword, and I alone am left, and they seek to take my life. And what's the Lord tell him to do?
Go back into the wilderness of
Yeah.
Damascus, and
Yeah.
I've got a plan, and
Yep.
I've got support for you. Here's that comfort, that reassurance of some of the things with God here is that
Yep.
he says you're gonna go and you're gonna anoint this guy named Hazael over and make him king over Syria. You're gonna name Jehu king over Israel. You're gonna have these individuals. You're gonna have Elisha as the prophet in your place. They're going to have someone that's kind of set up with everything. And they're going to take care of things. They will rule and they will give you support of not being left alone here in the flesh. And not only that, I've got
Yeah.
7,000. No, not let alone that, as you mentioned Obadiah, that 100, and you just kind of overlooked that. Now, here I've got 7,000 people who have not bowed the knee to Baal yet and have not kissed have not kissed him in any time, or not, have not
Yeah.
given any allegiance to them. I've got a plan. Just look at the bigger picture of everything. Listen to me, and I have help. I have aid for you. I have support for you. You are not alone, let alone he already had the Lord on his side.
Yeah.
But here's some extra kings and other individuals.
We know what's going to happen to Elijah. Elijah is going to be that odd individual who does not die. He ends up, what is it, being taken up by is it a whirlwind? Let's see. Isn't it let's see if we can find
Yeah,
it.
He was up by whirlwind into heaven. Chapter
Yep.
2, Second Kings.
Yep. Okay. Second Kings chapter 2, as it's the
Verse 1
chariots.
and then verse 11
Yeah, the
mentions it.
chariot of Israel. And anyway, I was thinking about that because I think you can might be an example of a little bit of an inference or a lot of an inference there back in First Kings 19 at verse 16 when of those three mentioned you mentioned Elisha. He says, "And Elisha the son of Shaphat of Abel Meholah you shall anoint as prophet in your place." And it's like, well, where am I going?
Yeah.
You know, wait a minute. There's going to be another prophet in my place. Okay, where am I going? And the Lord's about to take him, and he is going to be with the Lord. But as an application, I was thinking about because there's going to be a lot of killing. If people are familiar with the account, as he anoints Hazael and he anoints Jehu, and the Lord points to the killing that's going to happen, and the Lord is, the sword of vengeance as it is. But Elijah had a job to do, and it's like get busy, go
Yeah.
back and get busy. This is what you need to do with the time you have left. Get busy. And I don't know about you, Daniel, but sometimes it's like when I'm not busy, that's when I get the most discouraged.
Yeah.
That's just how it is for me. That when
The mind begins to wonder and
yes,
get off task. Yeah.
and I start going down rabbit holes, and I start, frankly, that's when it becomes very easy for me to enter into evil surmising, and start playing out scenarios in my mind
Yeah.
because my hands aren't busy, and I start thinking about things I shouldn't be thinking. And it's like, oh, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? Oh, I bet that person actually thinks this. Oh, I bet this. And you just start spiraling downward. And I know of a lady actually down south who dealt with depression, and her depression started actually she stayed home all the time. She stopped coming to church and she just laid in bed at home. And she stayed there for months and months and months. Finally, the lady, and she's a very nice lady, but she would not take encouragement and get out of those four walls.
Yeah.
And those four walls kept getting closer and closer until finally she had a stroke and then she could not get out. She would not get out and then she could not get out. And she would not make herself be busy
Yeah.
while she could. And she spiraled downward. And I can do the same thing, and I think we all can do the same thing. Here Elijah is, and Elijah's like, I don't know what to do. And the Lord says, you need to get busy doing this.
Yeah. He needed direction again. He needs some
Yeah,
guidance on direction with
right.
everything instead of isolation, instead of going hiding in the caves. Yeah, okay. You ran away from Jezebel. Here's what you need to do. Here's what you need to focus on. You need to just, like you said, you can't, don't be idle in the cave. It's not going to accomplish anything. Go out and do your work that you need to do for God. And here, if I'm going to reassure you that you are taken care of.
Yeah. He doesn't know how yet,
Yeah.
as far
You
as the
know,
whirlwind, but
yeah. And God will fulfill all the plans with everything. Got to have that little bit of faith at times to be able to continue on. That's going to help drive us to be able to continue on keeping the task and not being idle. Like you said, idleness it just creates more opportunity. There are times where we need to have that kind of just like break from society, so
Right.
to speak. But to continue in it, to continue to just isolate ourselves and be idle in whatever way, then we can see the danger of it, of how it fills the void that doesn't need to be filled.
Right.
And we lose sight, we lose track, we lose focus on what our purpose is and what we should be doing. There are things where thinking, well, I know what I need to do, but I'm just going to sit here and I'm not going to do anything.
I'm just going to sit here and stew.
Yeah, we'll sit here and stew. That
Yep.
doesn't do anything. You know what
And we
that
get
does? That
angrier.
creates that creates stress, anxiety, hatred, vileness, you know, and the toll of those different types of characters does on the physical body. It creates that downward spiral both physically and spiritually.
Yeah. Yep. So, I was to kind of back up and look at this whole account, in its entirety. This whole thing starts with bad leadership, right? That's Ahab and Jezebel.
Yeah.
This whole thing starts with bad leadership. Daniel, and I'll speak for myself. I have been places. Bad leadership can take a toll. It's like you
Yes.
better believe it can take a toll.
Yeah.
When you have elders who are not shepherding the flock, when you have elders who are either negligent in their duties or are actively harming the flock, they're wolves in sheep's clothing. And I've seen both.
I've
And
seen
bad,
and proxy elders. Don't
yeah,
let's not just say just elders, but also those who assume the
right,
position. And sometimes it's their own fault of just kind of okay, we're going to allow someone to kind of help, kind of be in charge of making
right,
decisions on things, and that can lead into a downward spiral too. And then you get proxy elders. Again, those are just they're not actually elders. They're just kind of we are elders, but we haven't been appointed in any way. That it leads into a downward
yeah,
spiral of things. Again,
yeah,
I'm speaking from some personal experiences I've
yep.
seen in my 41 years.
And so just bad leadership, whether we're talking about bad leadership in the church, bad leadership at home, bad leadership at work, bad leadership in schools, bad leadership in the country, it can be greatly discouraging, extremely discouraging. That's what Elijah's dealing with.
Yeah,
So to just back up and think about it, that's where it starts. Death itself. So many prophets had been killed. I remember when we moved down to Haynesville, Louisiana, and one of the guys who was so wonderful to be there, his name was Dean Claunch. And Dean was a wonderful fella. And he was someone who I knew I could count on in the congregation to do the right thing and to do the hard thing too. He was one of those guys. He's one of those guys like you, it's like wonderful guy. He goes into the hospital for just a routine surgery and he never came out. And so it's like we were there, I think, for about a year, year and a half. And all of a sudden, we didn't have elders. And it's like I needed him there. And all of a sudden, he dies. And death can be discouraging.
yeah,
Just when brethren die, it can be discouraging. When, you think about parents or grandparents or children, when children die, that can be extremely discouraging. Of course, I don't even have to say it.
yeah,
Death in and of itself. Elijah has seen many of his brethren killed. And it's like that's what Elijah's dealing with. And that's what we have to deal with. How many funerals have you done, Daniel? You keep a
too many
tally?
to count. I don't keep a
Yeah.
tally off the top of my head.
And so death is what's the solution to death? It's the resurrection. What's the solution to bad leadership? It's our citizenship is in heaven. And something else that Elijah was dealing with is isolation itself.
Yeah,
Because it's like, okay, Obadiah says, well, I have 100 people hidden away. Where were those 100 people when Elijah's up on the mountain with the prophets of Baal? Where were they at? They're not there. Okay,
Right.
there's 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. Where are they at when Elijah is confronting the prophets of Baal? They're not there. I'm glad they haven't bowed the knee to Baal, but at the same time, Elijah on the mountain, God was with him, and that was about it. And Daniel just privately, even though we're recording this between you and me, and our brethren, and we can be the same way. Our brethren have good intentions, and our brethren are faithful, but sometimes our brethren just are not there for us, like we would hope they would be. You know, for example, Moses, do you remember when Joshua is fighting the Amalekites and Moses is up on top of the mountain, and when he lifts his hand up, lifts the staff up, they win, and when he drops it, because he's getting tired,
Yeah.
they lose. And so what is it Aaron and Hur get on either side of him and prop his hands up, and they prevail because the Lord is with them. Well, who was there to prop up Elijah's hands? It's like even though there were 7,000 who hadn't bowed the knee, even though there's 100 hidden away in a cave somewhere, they're not there. They're not there with him on the mountain. And so what that has led to is, how does he feel? I feel all alone
Go alone.
because they're not right there to hold his hands up. And so sometimes, whether it might be distance, here in North Ridgeville, all the brethren are kind of spread out. There's some who live, 30 minutes one way and some 30 minutes the other way and some 30 minutes to the south, and everyone's kind of spread out. And sometimes it's easy to feel isolated when you're not right next to them all the time.
Right.
When you're together on Sunday morning, it's like, okay, we can hold each other's hands up and we can lift each other up and we can sing to one another and we can encourage one another. That's fine on Sunday. What happens on Monday morning? And by the way, if anyone's ever spoken to a lot of preachers, they speak about the depression that they have on Monday morning. And it's like Sunday they're good. It's what happens on Monday.
Yeah.
So anyway, sometimes just because we're isolated somewhat, at least we're isolated by distance or however you want to put it. Our brethren are out there. They're out there and we may know they're out there, but we feel isolated because they're not right here with us physically. Daniel, how long have we been going on so far? Do you
For
know?
this podcast or for
Yeah,
the uh,
I
almost
think
an
we ought to
hour.
turn this into a two-parter at
We're
least.
gonna turn this. I was going to suggest that we turn this into a two-parter.
Yeah.
How about Job and his difficulties next week with everything?
I think so. And so I think do you have anything you want to add to the account?
Yeah, I would, but it's not. But I'm going to use a song because when we're talking about some of the
Okay.
things at the beginning, that's why I know that people can't see it, but I got up because there was a song in the Songs of the Church book that I knew was in there that kind of
Yeah.
goes along with what you were talking about at the beginning from Psalm 126. And I'd like to read the song if that's okay. It's called
Yeah.
The Heart Shall Reap in Joy in Songs of the Church. If you have a Songs of the Church songbook, it's number 524. And it came to mind immediately after you started mentioning some things and think about what we're studying with Elijah today. The song's written by Miss Ada Powell and Austin Hazelwood were a couple of people that were involved with this. But again, the title of the song is The Heart Shall Reap in Joy. It says, some golden day the heart shall reap what once in tears was sown, and longing eyes shall never weep, nor feet shall walk alone. The seed, though sown in darkest night, shall one day bloom and bear, and gleaners in the morning light will find the harvest there. That golden day is free from fears, and cares no more annoy. The heart that oft has sown in tears shall reap some day in joy. The heart shall reap in joy. The heart shall reap in joy. The heart that oft has sown in tears shall reap some day in joy. There are different things that we face where we have to go through the darkest points, the trials, the temptations, the tribulations that we face in this life. And we have to go through those things. and have to face many tears at times and facing what we've been talking about today about discouragement. But the bigger picture is that though we may be sowing in tears, one day we shall reap in joy. And that's again, as we've talked about, looking forward, making that application, looking forward to heaven.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have to face many trials. Yes, it gets dark at times as Christians, facing discouragement, facing anxiety, facing anger and hatred and all sorts of different emotions. But being able to overcome those things, we can be able to reap in joy and looking forward to the hope and promise of eternal life.
You know, I was just thinking as you were talking about that, back where we began, like you
Yeah.
said, and as the Lord is talking to the disciples, the parable of the sower. And again, I do think he's wanting them to be prepared for reality, but at the same time, there is hope. And what he's saying is just spread the word. And really, what
Yeah.
he's talking about is what he himself had done. It's like, just spread the word. You sow.
People will respond differently,
Yep.
and there will be some that will yield a fruit.
And you know how it is. It's like you can go years and it's like I'm wasting my time, I'm wasting my time, I'm wasting my time. And then someone obeys the gospel and you realize I'm not wasting my time. And it makes it worth it. Even though 100 people refused, someone obeyed. Someone turned to the Lord and was saved by grace. And it's
It
like you,
reminds me of one, and you and I both know him. He was raised in the Catholic Church, and my dad worked with him. I know others worked with him. Your family worked with him, and it was a year and a half almost of working with him. And there were points where my dad personally thought, well, I don't know if it's going to pan out. I don't know if it's going to work out. We've been studying with him and never got any results or anything. And then all of a sudden, one night on a Wednesday night, he came in to services and said, I need to be baptized. I understand what
yeah,
I'm doing, how I'm living, and I need to turn to God and I need to be baptized tonight. And my dad said after all the different things that he felt over that time frame, it was all worth it.
yeah,
It was all worth it. One soul matters. It's that whole, the 99, the 100 sheep went out, the 99 are there. You go
yep.
back and get that one that's lost. It's worth it. It is worth it. It's worth it to God. And sometimes it takes time. Sometimes you feel like it's hopeless. You're not going to be able to get anywhere. Sometimes you feel useless with things. To get that one soul makes it all worth it.
This is Hebrews chapter 12.
Yeah.
Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and has sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. For the joy that was set before him. Made the point Sunday, how Jesus is described and how he's usually depicted in artwork.
Yeah.
Obviously he looked like a surfer from California. Obviously he was blonde haired and blue eyed. It's got to be true because that's what AI says it is. But anyway, I don't know of too many depictions of him that match, here for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. He despised the shame, and he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. He was looking to the reward. He was looking to the other side of death. Because before that, how Isaiah describes him is a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. And we hid as it was our face from him. He was a man of sorrows. It's like he was acquainted with grief. It was the things he faced, no one else has ever faced. He's the Son of God, and he's rejected by men. And yet, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross, despising the shame. And he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. When he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and he says, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but thine be done. Jesus was extremely discouraged. And we know he was extremely discouraged because God sent an angel to strengthen him.
Yeah.
He needed strengthened. He needed help. And the angel was sent. And Jesus prayed more earnestly, Thy will be done. If even Jesus needed strengthened, well, what do we need? It's like, we need it too. We need strengthened. So,
Verse
but I was just
3.
thinking about,
I'm gonna read verse 3 as well of Hebrews 12. For consider him who endured such hostility from sinners against himself. This is what he's doing for us, lest you become weary and discouraged in your souls. Here's Christ, who is the author and finisher of our faith, and what he went through
yeah,
for you and I, the support that we have, the love that we have, the looking to Jesus, who knows what we went through but did not commit sin.
yeah.
We can look to him. That way we are not weary and discouraged. That he offers us comfort, encouragement, edification, all the things to help build us up and to not be driven down further and further away from him.
So, Daniel, given all this, what I said to my daughter, when I said, I'm not sure we should be happy. Am I crazy? If Jesus was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and I was just thinking about, am I crazy that as we go through our lives and we're trying to live faithfully to the Lord, but we are surrounded by these things? Is it any surprise that we ourselves are filled with sorrow as we sow in tears?
Yeah, that's not crazy. That's why Jesus said the way to life is difficult, is hard, not impossible, but it leads to life.
So I shouldn't be expected just to go through life whistling Dixie.
Yep, it's not fuzzy bunnies and rainbows and all the good easy things.
I do like rainbows and fuzzy bunnies. But in this life, there's a lot of fires, a lot of earthquakes, and a lot of those different kinds of things.
Yep,
And so it's easy to be discouraged. I'll add this little tidbit. There in Revelation, when it talks about those who are lost, the very first one that is spoken about are cowards. And it's those who have lost courage.
yep,
And that's what the devil wants. The devil wants us to be discouraged.
yeah.
And so we look to the Lord. Daniel, appreciate it.
Appreciate it as well. Next week we'll talk about Job, talk about the discouraged, some of the things that he went through and how he handled things. We'll probably touch base with some of those things in Job 1 and 2, talking about some of the different losses and the comfort that he got, quote unquote.
Or lack thereof.
and and
He
and
needed
then
better friends.
and then looking at the kind of the turnaround with everything later on in the chapter or in the
Yeah.
book of what happens, and also his friends coming back around and kind of told make amends with Job now.
And Job is told to pray for them.
Yeah, exactly. And we'll
Yep.
talk more about that. And some of
Uh,
the, because we can relate to Job, but maybe a little bit more. We can relate to Elijah, definitely. But, with some of the different things that we're experiencing, what Job experienced, it gets even more personal for us
yeah.
as we look
Yep.
at that.
All right. Hope everyone is doing well. Appreciate you tuning in, and we hope you join us next week for another episode of Looking to Jesus.